Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. We're entering a phase of hectic diplomatic activity. The BRICS Summit is happening this week in South Africa. A few days later, the G20 Summit will happen in India. Will the Chinese President travel to New Delhi for that? The answer depends on what happens in Johannesburg. Prime Minister Modi and President Xi will come face to face there. They will hold a meeting on the sidelines. Will they hold a meeting on the sidelines? There's a lot of buzz around that. We'll bring you the details that we have. In Pakistan, the political slugfest has intensified. The president says he did not sign the bills that give more power to the army. In Russia, a big blow to their space ambitions. Their moon mission has crashed. In India, after tomatoes, onion prices are on the rise. The government has slapped an export duty to ensure supply in the country. In Bangladesh, political violence has flared up ahead of elections. In the US, Donald Trump is threatening India on the campaign trail. And do you need another booster for the Wuhan virus? Cases and hospitalizations are on the rise in the West. President Biden is pitching for another jab. We'll discuss the headlines first. The Netherlands will give 42 F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. Denmark will provide 19 more. Ukraine has been asking for these jets to counter Russia's air superiority. Moscow calls the transfer of the jets to Kiev an escalation in the war. China fumes over the Camp David statement of the US, South Korea and Japan. The statement criticized Beijing's quote-unquote aggressive behavior in the East and South China Sea. Beijing calls it a smear attack. Camp David marked the first time the US, South Korea and Japan met for a standalone summit. Thailand's coalition joins forces with another army-linked party. It comes on the eve of a vote to choose a new prime minister. The PPR party was created for the junta to hold on to power. Thailand has been politically deadlocked since the elections in May. Britain's infant killer nurse is sentenced to life imprisonment. Lucy Letby was convicted of murdering 7 newborn babies. She also tried to kill 6 other infants in her care. Letby is Britain's most prolific child killer in modern times. Amid escalating tensions, China bans mangoes from Taiwan. Taipei slams the move. Beijing claims it found pests in the mangoes. In recent years, China has banned many Taiwanese food products. On Saturday, Beijing held military drills around the island. And Spain win the Women's World Cup, but its football chief is under fire. The official kissed a player on her lips during the celebration, sparking outrage. There have been calls for FIFA to take action. But Luis Rubiales says his gesture was quote-unquote a show of affection. We have an action-packed week ahead. Prime Minister Modi is traveling to South Africa. He will attend the BRICS Summit, but that's not what we're talking about tonight. We want to focus on another potential meeting that's creating a lot of buzz. The India-China bilateral talks. We understand that a meeting is being planned. Prime Minister Modi could meet President Xi Jinping of China on the sidelines of the BRICS Summit. They're likely to discuss the border standoff. And I don't need to spell this out. This is a big deal. Prime Minister Modi has not met President Xi Jinping for almost 3 years. The border situation led to a complete breakdown in dialogue. There was no top-level engagement at all. But there was a brief and informal encounter last year, the details of which came out only recently. In 2022, the two leaders met in Bali. They were attending the G20 summit that was being hosted by Indonesia. Initially, New Delhi described this encounter as just a handshake, just an exchange of pleasantries. But that was not the full story. Turns out, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi also discussed the border. The Chinese side claims there was a quote-unquote important consensus and that the leaders spoke about the need to stabilize the relationship. Those are the words that they used. We did not have the specifics. But in the last month, we've seen several high-profile meetings. Last week, India and China held military talks. There was no breakthrough, but we did get a joint statement. It said remaining issues will be resolved in an expeditious manner. So have the doors open for direct negotiations now. Will the Himalayan border standoff be resolved in Johannesburg? Here's what we can expect. Since last week, China has been dropping hints. First, their top diplomat in South Africa spoke. He was discussing the upcoming BRICS Summit with journalists, and this is what he said about the bilateral. I'm confident that as two nations, two countries, we will have direct talks, direct meetings. I cannot say there is tension between us, but as neighboring countries, we have many common interests. At the same time, we have some problems. Typical China, always downplaying what's happening at the border. And what is New Delhi saying about all of this? Not very much at this point. Officially, there is no meeting scheduled yet. Indian diplomats are dodging direct questions about this. More importantly, they're not dismissing the possibility of a meeting. So there is a real chance that the leaders could meet. Fun fact, since 2014, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi have met 19 times. The Bali meeting was the last one. But that was not a formal engagement. They've had no bilateral meet since the 2020 clashes in Galwan. So a meeting now will be significant, and it may not be a pleasant conversation. For starters, the India-China border remains tense. There is an unprecedented build-up on both sides. Two friction points still remain. In the last 3 years, India has airlifted 70,000 troops to be stationed at the border with China. Also heavy weapons like tanks and artillery guns. They weigh over 9,000 tons. China maintains a similar level of deployment. India wants a de-escalation to normalize the relationship, but China has refused to budge. Then there's a deadlock over the BRICS agenda too, over the expansion of BRICS, the idea of an alternative currency, and contemporary economic issues. All of this will be taken up at the summit. And on all these issues, India and China stand on the opposite sides. Take the BRICS expansion, for instance. China wants to turn it into a bigger group, something that rivals the G7, but India opposes that. New Delhi wants the BRICS to be more selective. So there is an impasse. The war in Ukraine is also casting its shadow. Russia wants the BRICS to go tough on the West. China endorses that position from Russia. But India prefers a more measured approach. And this has already landed the summit in controversy. The Russian president will not be attending in person. He will join via video conferencing. That's because of a legal complication that he wants to avoid. You see, the ICC, or the International Criminal Court, has issued an arrest warrant against Putin. This was in the month of March. They issued an arrest warrant. Now, South Africa is an ICC signatory. So if Putin shows up on South African territory, they're obliged to arrest him. Even if they don't, it would be an awkward situation for all those involved. So to avoid this, both sides mutually agreed to host Putin virtually. Meanwhile, New Delhi is navigating its own dilemmas. Next month, it will host the G20 summit. There is no consensus on a joint statement yet. The G20 is divided over the war in Ukraine. How can India, as president, overcome these divisions to push for a common agenda? How can India champion the cause of the global south without being caught in the politics over Russia's war? Perhaps by engaging with China. It's a long shot, but it is worth a try. Xi Jinping has not confirmed his attendance yet. His own economy is in a mess. So the Communist Party is under pressure. Beijing needs stability, and a border standoff with India does not help them at this point. So it is in China's interest to end it. The G20 summit gives India some leverage. It should not hesitate in using it. Now, Pakistan is called the home of the Dusra. It's a type of ball in cricket. It basically spins the other way. Pakistani spinners are known for this confusing delivery. Well, turns out, so is their president. I'm talking about this man, Arif Alvi. He's been a spectator for most of 2023, but suddenly he wants in on the action. On Sunday, the president posted this message on social media. It was a bombshell. Listen to what he said, and I'm quoting from the words of the Pakistani president. I did not sign the Official Secrets Amendment Bill 2023 and Pakistan Army Amendment Bill 2023 as I disagreed with these laws. I asked my staff to return the bills unsigned. However, I have found out today that my staff undermined my will and command. What exactly is the president talking about? Before exiting office, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and his government passed multiple laws in Pakistan, and most of them were controversial. But two of them stand out. One, the Official Secrets Amendment Bill, and two, the Pakistan Army Amendment Bill. Now, these bills had two objectives: tighten the noose around Imran Khan and strengthen the Pakistan army. For example, the Official Secrets Act cracks down on leaking intelligence. Say you reveal information about an agent or a diplomatic cable or an informant, you can be jailed for 3 years and fined $34,000. That's the Official Secrets Act. The Army Act is worse. It provides up to 5 years of rigorous imprisonment for disclosing information that affects the army. In simple words, these bills are anti-democratic. They give the Pakistan army sweeping powers. The power to crack down on dissidents, to jail political leaders and to keep tabs on rivals. Both these bills were pushed through Parliament before August the 9th in fact. The final step was presidential assent. Now, everyone assumed it was just a matter of time. In fact, some Pakistani websites reported that Arif Alvi, the president, had signed these bills. Well, that's when the clarification came. Arif Alvi says he did not sign either bill, that he sent them back to the Parliament. But tell that to the caretaker government of Pakistan. They have already charged people under these new laws. No prizes for guessing who? Imran Khan and his trusted aide Shah Mahmood Qureshi. Both men have been charged under the amended Official Secrets Act. But how is that possible? If the president did not sign it, how has it become law? Pakistan's caretaker law minister has an answer. He says the president has two options when presented with a bill: A, sign and approve it, or B, send back with suggestions. But Arif Alvi apparently invented a third option. He did not approve it, nor did he give suggestions. So after 10 days, it automatically became the law. I know it is bizarre, but then again, it's Pakistan. Constitutional clarity is not exactly their strong suit. Arif Alvi is blaming his staff for what happened. Did they forge his signature? Did they not highlight his suggestions? Or did they just keep the bill hidden away for 10 days? And at this point, anything is possible. But a bigger question is this: why is Arif Alvi taking on the establishment? He was Imran Khan's pick to become president in 2018. He was a founding member of his party, the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. So the bond is quite old. When Imran Khan was first arrested, the president criticized it. He said the ex-prime minister had been quote-unquote manhandled. But once the army's crackdown began, he was cut to size. He became a spectator. So why is he entering the field again? Well, his presidential term ends next month. There is no official word on whether he will get an extension, so maybe he thought he has nothing to lose. Whatever the reason, Imran Khan's party is thrilled. Look at their response to Arif Alvi's statement. Save this tweet from the Honorable President. Use this to teach your kids that it's important to speak the truth and serve your designation with dignity. That's what Imran Khan's party is saying. What is the Pakistan army saying? Well, nothing so far, but the caretaker government is calling it a matter of grave concern. Chances are the judiciary will also get involved at some point. This episode is a reminder of how tense things are in Pakistan. Imran Khan may be down, but he is not out. He still has friends in high places. And one of them is the country's president. The question is, how far will these allies go for him? Will they support him when the army closes in? A lot hinges on that. With the elections delayed to February, this is a crucial time for Pakistan. The army is hoping to put Imran Khan away for good. But like a bad habit, he keeps coming back. It's great entertainment for people elsewhere, but spare a thought for the people of Pakistan. This circus, called Pakistani politics, holds the key to their future. I will start our next story with a flashback. The year was 1976. The Soviet Union was still intact. Leonid Brezhnev ruled the Kremlin. Moscow was gearing up for a space launch. It was sending its Luna 24 to the moon. This was the Soviet Union's last shot at the space race. They were leading it in the beginning, but soon the US took over. They sent humans to the moon, and the space race was never the same again. So the Luna 24 was almost like a last-ditch effort in 1976. But little did the Soviet Union know that it would also be their last mission to the moon. Cut to 2023, 47 years have passed. Russia under Vladimir Putin has made another attempt. They launched the Luna 25 mission. It took off on the 11th of August. It was supposed to land on the south pole of the moon. It was supposed to be a historic first, but it was not to be. On the 19th of August, Russia lost contact with the probe, and after that, everything went downhill. The spacecraft spun out of control and soon crashed onto the moon. Russia's space agency, Roscosmos, has since issued a statement. It said, and I'm quoting, "The apparatus moved into an unpredictable orbit and ceased to exist as a result of a collision with the surface of the moon." Basically, they're calling it a technical glitch. Roscosmos will set up a commission to look into the failure. Well, whatever the conclusion, this is a big blow for Russia. The Soviet Union was the original space superpower. It launched the first satellite into space, the Sputnik 1. It sent the first man into space, Yuri Gagarin. It sent the first woman into space, Valentina Tereshkova. They even sent the first dog into space, a dog named Laika. They were behind the first spacewalk, the first lunar probe, you name it, and the Soviet Union had already done it. So Moscow was leading this race. But then came the Apollo moon landings of 1969. They gave America the edge. In 1991, things took a turn for the worse for Moscow. The Soviet Union had just collapsed and Russia reorganized its space program. It was under a state agency called Roscosmos. But things were never the same. That's because the agency was cash-strapped. In 2020, the budget for Russia's space agency was around $1.4 billion. Compare that to NASA's budget for the same year, $22.6 billion. Despite this wide gap, Roscosmos did not give up. It collaborated with other agencies, like the NASA and the European Space Agency. It had the knowledge and the expertise, but it did not move with the times, it seems. While the world explored or focused on the exploration of Mars and beyond, Russia was still stuck in the orbit of yesteryears. The headlines were not about historic launches anymore. Instead, they talked about technical failures, about budget constraints, an aging workforce, bureaucratic inertia. The most ironic twist of fate was satellite launches. There was a time when Russia was the go-to choice for launching payloads. Over the years, it found itself relying on other countries. It rented out its launch facilities to competitors. It's almost like having a vintage sports car and lending it to others to drive. Basically, Russia's space agency was stuck in a time warp, basking in past glory. The war in Ukraine made things worse. Russia was heavily sanctioned. Its space sector suffered. Initially, Russia and Europe planned to partner on the Luna 25. But that partnership ended with the war. And this lunar mission became all the more important for Russia. They had a point to prove. They had to regain their lost glory.
The question is, will the Kremlin and the Ministry of Finance be ready to fund projects like this? Because the development will take a long time. It will take years and billions of rubles, while the outcome is questionable. Will they be ready to spend time and money for another embarrassment?
With this crash, Russia's cosmic slide is evident. From being a space superpower to resembling a rocket in free fall, their first mission in almost 5 decades has ended in a crash. But the focus on the moon won't end anytime soon. As we speak, India's Chandrayaan-3 is making its way to the moon. It is supposed to land on the 23rd of August. The world is watching its trajectory. If it lands successfully, it will be the first to land on the moon's south pole. So the Luna 25 may have failed, but the space race is just heating up. I have a question for you. What is the most dangerous combination in politics? Inflation and elections. It's a nightmare for any politician. Here in India, the government is facing that deadly combination, inflation and elections. Inflation is at a 15-month high. Food prices are up by double digits, and multiple elections are around the corner. So how is the government responding? By controlling exports. Onion is the latest commodity. India has imposed a 40% export duty on onions. 40%. How does that help? The export duty makes Indian onion more expensive abroad, and more expensive equals less demand. So the idea is to discourage the export of onions, to retail more supply in the Indian market, and hopefully to stabilize prices. Speaking of which, onion prices have risen by 20% from July to August. Chances are they will rise further. The current rate is around 30 rupees per kilogram. Experts say it will double by September, maybe even reach 70 rupees per kilogram. The question is why? Unlike cereals, onion is not affected by the war in Ukraine. So why are prices rising? You can blame climate change and erratic weather for that. India has 3 onion seasons. The season from April to June dominates supply. Around 65% of India's output comes from that season, April to June. Now, this supply is supposed to last until September. By then, the next round of harvest begins. It's usually a smooth transition, but this year it was not so smooth. Onions harvested during the summer are rotting faster. The unseasonal rains have affected their shelf life. So come September, there could be a crunch, hence the export duty. On paper, the duty is supposed to last until the 31st of December this year, but a lot depends on how things play out. If the price rise continues, the government may consider bigger steps, like banning onion exports altogether. It was last done in 2020. But if the prices cool down, the duty could be removed. And traders will be hoping for that. Most of them are protesting the export duty. In fact, trade has been indefinitely halted at Asia's largest onion market, which is located in Nashik, in Maharashtra. The question is, how quickly can prices be cooled? Let's look at what happened with tomatoes. 2 weeks back, the price was 260 rupees per kilogram, and now it's under 100 rupees. So things are looking better. Not ideal, but definitely better. The government is also selling subsidized tomatoes from vans and public shops. Those cost just 40 rupees per kilo. The plan is to do the same with onions. Government shops and vans will be selling onion for 25 rupees per kg. The buffer stock is also being increased. It was 3 million tons earlier. Now it will be increased to 5 million tons. So fingers crossed the price will come down. But at what cost? India is the largest exporter of onions in the world. In the first half of 2023, trade was up 63%. Dozens of countries buy onions from us, like Bangladesh, Nepal, Malaysia, the UAE and Sri Lanka. How will they respond to this move? And the onion move is not an isolated one. First, India banned the export of wheat, then non-basmati white rice. Now, higher export duty on onions, and reports say sugar could be next. There is talk of banning the export or setting quotas. Now, such sudden decisions will affect credibility. They will leave importers in a limbo. And that is one problem. The second problem is that of climate change. Let's face it, our weather is more erratic than ever. But are the farmers prepared for it? Has the government prepared them for it? Tomato prices were up because of weather, and now onion prices are up because of the same reason. We need to find solutions for this. When you have 1.4 billion people to feed, you can't afford volatility. You need an assured supply. Maybe onions will jolt the government to action. They're not as important in our diet as rice or potato, but onions are politically savvy. You hear inflation and you think about 2 things, fuel and onions. In fact, India's 1980 general election was called the onion election. Tells you how important they are. The current government also realizes this, which is why the export duty has been announced in the first place. But will it be enough to plug the supply issues? Guess we'll have to wait and watch. And now let's turn our attention to the east, to India's neighbor Bangladesh. It is heading for polls, and it's been seeing regular bouts of violence. This has been a feature of Bangladeshi elections, political violence. Over the weekend, some 300 people were reportedly injured in clashes. These were clashes between members of the Bangladesh Nationalist Party and the police. That's the BNP. It's the biggest opposition party in the country. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has been in charge for about 20 years overall, and her premiership has not been without controversy. She's been accused of stifling democracy and going after the opposition, especially former Prime Minister Khalida Zia. Zia was imprisoned in 2018 on charges of corruption. Her supporters say this was politically motivated and that Sheikh Hasina cannot be trusted to hold an impartial election. So they've been taking to the streets to protest and clashing with the police. Here's a report.
This weekend, northeast Bangladesh erupted in violence. Thousands clashed on the streets. hundreds were injured. They were members of Bangladesh's two biggest political parties, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party or BNP and the ruling Awami League. The Bangladeshi police force was also involved in the clashes. There are almost 300 injured after the clashes. This includes members of the BNP, the Awami League and the police. All sides are trading accusations, blaming the other for starting fights and vandalism. The police are pointing fingers at the BNP.
BNP activists threw brick bats at us suddenly. Their brick bats injured many of my men, including the officer in charge of the Sadar police station. Then the police defended themselves. Currently, we have the situation under control at both of the spots.
The opposition BNP took out a march on Saturday. That's when the clashes first erupted. But they say the Bangladeshi police are biased, that they're extensions of the government, and that the police unfairly stopped their rally on Saturday and charged at their members. Later, supporters of the ruling Awami League also took out a march, and that too became violent. The BNP members claim the Awami League and the police worked together to vandalize their offices, and they say it shows why they need to protest.
The police proved that there is no chance of a fair election under them. We can't do any political activity if they exist in Habiganj. We request the proper authority for an immediate investigation by a neutral entity and necessary action against the guilty forces.
Bangladesh will head to polls in January 2024. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is once again looking to extend her time in office and prolong her Awami League's grip on power. Sheikh Hasina has served as PM continuously from January 2009, and she had served one term between 1996 and 2001 as well. So she's been in charge of Bangladesh for almost 20 years in all. But the entire time she has competed against her arch-rival, former Prime Minister Khaleda Zia. Their rivalry is legendary. Khaleda Zia is the widow of Bangladesh's sixth president, Ziaur Rahman. After he was assassinated, she took over his party. She rose to become Bangladesh's first female Prime Minister in 1991. Khaleda Zia and Sheikh Hasina have ruled Bangladesh since 1991. The two matriarchs spent the initial years swapping power after every election. But Sheikh Hasina has been firmly in charge since 2009. In 2018, Khaleda Zia was imprisoned in a graft case. BNP supporters call it political persecution, while Awami League members say it's justice. In 2011, Sheikh Hasina removed Bangladesh's system of caretaker governments. That's when an interim unelected government could take charge after a government completed its term. These were supposed to ensure free and fair elections so the incumbent government would not have an unfair advantage during polls. But the Awami League said an unelected government, even in a caretaker capacity, was unconstitutional, and they did away with that system. Ever since then, Khaleda Zia's supporters say Bangladeshi elections are rigged, and they have been demanding a return to the caretaker system. The BNP have protested often. These demonstrations have turned violent on many occasions, and they're usually followed by Awami League counter-protests which aren't peaceful either. Bangladesh is no stranger to political violence. The country has a bloody history of assassinations, coups and political bombings. And even though Bangladesh has seen rapid economic growth in recent years, it has yet to outgrow its blood-stained politics.
Speaking of politics, the US is gearing up for a presidential election next year, and Donald Trump is hoping to make a comeback. He's ahead in the polls, at least in his party, but the former president is still feeling insecure, it seems. So he's going back to some old tactics, like complaining about taxes in India. Donald Trump is talking about Harley Davidsons again. You know, the American bikes? India taxes them. And it's been one of the pet peeves of Donald Trump. So as he hits the campaign trail, he's making fresh threats. Trump says he wants retribution. If they are charging us, we will charge them. Those are his words. They here is India. Trump says if he wins again, he will slap more taxes on Indian goods. This is from an interview that he's just given. Let me quote from what he said. The other thing I want to have is a matching tax where if India charges us, India is very big with tariffs. I mean, I saw it with Harley Davidson. I was saying, how do you do in a place like India? Oh, no good, sir. Why? They have 100% and 150% and 200% tariffs. If India is charging us 200% and we are charging them nothing for products, can we charge them 100%? No, sir. That's not free trade. Have you heard this before? Well, we have. Trump has said all of this in the past. As president, he repeatedly complained about India's taxes. We looked through the archives and we found this statement from 2018. Listen to this.
Well, India charges us tremendous tariffs when we send Harley Davidsons, motorcycles, other things to India. They charge very, very high tariffs.
India and America have an extensive trade partnership. All kinds of products are traded and sold, from almonds to apples, metals like steel and aluminium, pharmaceuticals and weapons and everything in between. Both sides have done military drills. India has bought American oil too, but all Trump can think about are Harleys. Do you know how many of these bikes are sold in India? A few hundred every year. Last year, just 601 bikes were sold. That's all. 601 Harley-Davidson bikes sold in a country of 1.4 billion people in 1 year. 601. It's not even a drop in the ocean. Now, to be fair, the brand has legacy. It's more than 100 years old. Many Americans identify with a Harley bike, but Americans, not Indians. In India, it barely has a presence. Can removing the tax on these bikes fix the trade imbalance? It stands at $28 billion in India's favor. Removing or reducing taxes on a few hundred bikes will not really help. Then why does Trump keep obsessing about it? He does because it makes a good political point. Trump is basically appealing to his core voters. This pitch is designed for regions like the Midwest and the South. They have a large number of Trump supporters, also a large number of Harley-Davidson owners. Often, there is little distinction between these two groups. Many are members of organized groups like this one, Bikers for Trump. On Facebook, they have more than 376,000 followers. They organize riding events, and mobilize support for Trump. Most members of this group own a Harley. Now, this is an important vote bank for Republican leaders. Other candidates are also trying to woo them. In the month of June this year, there was an event in Iowa. Many Republican candidates turned up. Among them was Mike Pence, Trump's former running mate and vice president. Pence took part in the bike parade. Let me show you a picture. That's Mike Pence riding a Cobalt Harley-Davidson. Do you know who else was there? Ron DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, even Nikki Haley, the entire roster of Republican presidential hopefuls at a bike rally. They all attended it. Guess who did not? Donald Trump. But he's making statements that will win these votes. Trump is leading the Republican primaries as of today. If the present trend continues, he is guaranteed the nomination. The only challenge at this point seems to be legal. He faces a series of court cases. Some of the charges could lead to a jail term. So the former president is leaving nothing to chance, but trashing India over Harley-Davidsons is bad strategy, really. The company closed its India operations in 2020. That's the year when Donald Trump was defeated in the election. Harley-Davidson does not even manufacture in India anymore. It has licensed the production to an Indian manufacturer. In the US, the bike is losing customers. So Trump may be betting on a shrinking voter base. Instead of complaining about India's tax regime, perhaps he should work on his legal strategy to remain in the race. From Trump, let's turn to his biggest nemesis, the Wuhan virus. It's mutated so many times since 2020, and each time there is renewed interest. We hear more predictions and precautions. Tonight we're focusing on one of them, booster shots. Should you keep taking booster shots or not? The White House certainly thinks so. President Joe Biden is expected to release a statement soon. He will ask Americans to get booster shots. Well, what number are we on? Depends on your age and health condition. Biden, for example, has got 5 shots. Chances are he will get his 6th one before this winter. But why is the US suddenly talking about boosters again? Because of a new variant. It's called Pyrola. The strain has been detected in Israel, Denmark, the US and the UK. The World Health Organization is monitoring it. Based on their findings, they will designate the variant. whether it's a variant of interest or a variant of concern. But right now, it's too early to say. Doctors believe it has a significant number of mutations. Theoretically, that could help the variant evade vaccines. But Pyrola or not, cases are rising. The US reported 10,000 hospital admissions in the first week of August. That was 14% more than the week before. Pharma companies are confident that their shots are updated. Moderna released some data last week. They said their booster can defend against Eris and Fornax variants. Eris and Fornax, again, these are strains of the Wuhan virus. Eris has led to an increase in hospitalizations in the UK and Europe. But are boosters the answer to all of this? Let's look at a couple of factors. Number one, more than 5.6 billion people have received the Wuhan virus vaccine. That's around 72% of the world population. So much of the world is immunized. Factor number two, the mortality rate. Despite occasional spikes in cases, the deaths have not increased. India, for example, reported just one death in the last 24 hours. My point is simple. This is not 2020. We do need vaccines, but our strategy needs to change. The World Health Organization released some guidelines in March this year. They divided people into three groups: high priority, medium priority, and low priority. The high priority group includes older adults and people with comorbidities. These people need a fourth shot. They need it 6 or 12 months after the third one. And don't mistake this for annual boosters. The WHO specifically warned against it. Listen to this. The additional booster recommendation should not be seen as for continued annual COVID-19 vaccine boosters. The aim is to serve countries planning for the near to mid-term. Now to the medium priority groups. These are people below 50 without comorbidities. The World Health Organization suggested 3 shots for them. So the primary series plus 1 booster. And finally, the low priority group, children aged 6 months to 17 years. For this group, the WHO has left the decision to governments. They said 3 shots are fine, but take a call based on your health situation. Like how much are you spending on it? Is it affecting other vaccination programs like measles or polio? Basically, don't make it mandatory. So the WHO guidelines cover up to 4 shots, but some countries are talking about triple boosters. How is that? Well, one reason is that they can afford it. The second reason is that the scientific community is divided. The US is talking about making Wuhan virus shots annual, like your flu vaccine. But some within the US FDA are not convinced. They say the flu is seasonal, but the Wuhan virus may or may not be. So the need for annual shots has to be proven. It has not been proven yet. We need a solid reason to keep taking shots, and that reason cannot be why not. Because pharma companies will keep investing in vaccines, they will keep updating them. Just look at what happened last week. Health companies dragged the entire US market down, but 3 firms bucked the trend. Pfizer shares were up 3%. Why? Because their booster showed some good progress. Moderna and Novavax also did well. Again, why? Because US hospital admissions hit 10,000. Do you see the problem here? We can't let pharma companies dictate the need for boosters. We have doctors for that. We have governments for that. There are vulnerable, aged people who genuinely need boosters. These people should keep taking them. The rest should follow scientific advice. Look at the opportunity cost. Look at the public health impact. Then you can decide on boosters. If your doctors tell you, don't think twice. Get yourself another shot. Otherwise, keep yourself informed. The WHO and other agencies have released enough information on jabs. Go to their website, read and understand. Now let's move from boosters to borders, specifically the bloody border between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. A chilling new report has been released today. It's by the Human Rights Watch. Now, this report details the horrors experienced by asylum seekers. It talks about Saudi border guards and how they brutally murder unarmed Ethiopian refugees, how they use artillery shells on groups of migrants or shoot them at point-blank range. And I repeat, most of the victims are unarmed. They're fleeing war. Remember, Ethiopia saw a bloody war in Tigray for 2 years, and now there's violence in the Amhara region. So a lot of Ethiopians are fleeing conflict. Many are smuggled to the Yemen-Saudi border by human traffickers. They're exploited at every turn, only to be tortured or murdered by Saudi border security. Saudi Arabia denies all these allegations. A Saudi official has called this report baseless. But it's not the first such report. Here's more.
A new horror has cropped up along Saudi Arabia's border with Yemen. The burial sites of hundreds of murdered refugees, of Ethiopian asylum seekers who were blown apart by mortars, shot at point-blank range, often for the amusement of the shooters. And who are the ones being accused of this barbaric behavior? Saudi Arabian border guards. They've been accused of killing hundreds of asylum seekers in the last few years. A new report was released today by the Human Rights Watch. It's a New York-based group that investigates atrocities like war crimes. But the Human Rights Watch isn't the first to highlight these border killings. In June, the International Organization for Migration said 795 people had died at the Saudi-Yemen border in recent months. Last October, special rapporteurs for the UN Human Rights Council also sent a report. They said 430 asylum seekers had been killed between January and April 2022. Another 650 had been injured. This was last year. The numbers have reportedly just kept on increasing. The latest report by the Human Rights Watch has considered cell phone footage, videos allegedly shot by the migrants to document their plight. Satellite imagery was also used to establish the location where the atrocities took place and where the burial sites were located. They also interviewed 42 survivors. 38 of them were Ethiopian, and they described the horrors they saw in the Saudi killing fields. The survivors spoke about explosives being fired at them. Artillery like mortars. One 14-year-old said she saw 30 people get killed in one go. The survivors also mentioned piles of bodies littering the border area, some torn to pieces because of the explosives used. Survivors said the guards didn't care whether the refugees were men or women. The Saudi soldiers fired explosives at them irrespective. Others spoke about torture, of how Saudi border guards played mind games with the refugees, asking them where they'd prefer to be shot, through the hand or the leg. One teenager described his gruesome ordeal. Saudi border guards forced him to rape another survivor under the threat of execution. These are just some of the horrific accounts. Saudi Arabia has denied all of them, just like with the previous reports. A Saudi official spoke to the media. He didn't disclose his identity, but said that no such thing took place. He called the Human Rights Watch report baseless, even though it contained satellite imagery and witness testimonies. Most of the victims are from Ethiopia. They're refugees fleeing the numerous conflicts plaguing northern Ethiopia. It's the aftermath of the Tigray civil war and the current conflict in the Amhara state. The Tigray war ended in 2022, and by the end of that year, there were about 750,000 Ethiopians living in Saudi Arabia. About 450,000 of them had entered the kingdom illegally. This is according to the International Organization for Migration. Many of the migrants cross into Saudi Arabia at Yemen. That's where these atrocities are being committed. First, they're ferried across the sea in ramshackle boats. This is after paying human traffickers to get them out of Ethiopia. Then they're carted off to the refugee camps in northern Yemen. The Houthi rebel group, which controls the area, apparently profits off the refugees by charging them exit fees. Then they make the dangerous journey through the mountains separating Yemen and Saudi Arabia. And when they think safety is within reach, they end up being murdered by the Saudi Arabian border guards. So if Saudi Arabia doesn't condone this, then offending border guards need to be punished. Let's see how the kingdom responds.
Now let me tell you about a heist engulfed in irony. Our next story is about the British Museum. It's a grand institution, also a shining symbol of wide-ranging thefts. In fact, it is the world's biggest receiver of stolen property. But its motto seems to be, first you loot, then you lose. We say this because the world's greatest thief is now being looted. Let me explain how. From the 16th to the 20th century, the British went on a colonization spree. They ravaged nation after nation and stole their culture. They looted close to 8 million artifacts. The list included India's Kohinoor diamond, Nigeria's bronze plaques, and decapitated dried Maori heads. All of this is displayed at the British Museum. They've been urged to return what they stole. Of course they haven't, and they don't plan to. Instead, they ticket the world proudly to let them view the loot. They make money off it. The British Museum has locked up the legacy of other lands, and poorly so. Recently, a staff member was accused of stealing from it. The lost items included gold jewelry and gems dating from the 15th to the 19th century. Now, the suspected worker has been fired. An investigation is underway, but this is not a unique instance. In 2004, 15 pieces of Chinese jewelry were stolen from the museum. In 2002, a 2,500-year-old Greek marble head was taken. Also, this is not unique to the British Museum. Artifact thefts are very common, apparently. Last year, thieves stole 500 ancient gold coins from a German museum. In 2019, jewels worth $108 million were stolen from another German museum. Despite security, museums suffer robberies. Experts say this happens nearly every day across the world. According to the latest Art Loss Register, 700,000 antiques and collectibles are currently lost or stolen, 7 lakh pieces. But here's what's shocking. Such thefts happening in institutions as large as the British Museum, they hold monumental objects. They chronicle entire civilizations and help us understand them. Like the Rosetta Stone, it enabled researchers to understand ancient Egypt. It was part of the British loot. It now sits inside a glass case. Artifacts like these are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, so the museum cannot afford to be caught off guard because we know what comes next. Most of the stolen items are sold in the black market or even melted down. In 2005, it happened to a Henry Moore sculpture. It was worth about $4 million, but it was melted down and sold for less than $2,000. It's criminal. But that's not even the worst part. These museums hold the world's history hostage. They contain what is not theirs, and they fail to protect it. Countries like Greece, India, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Ghana say these artifacts are theirs. They should be returned, and they're right. But do you know the museum's response? They say these countries lack the infrastructure to protect such expensive historic items. By the looks of it, the British Museum is not doing a great job either. In fact, it reeks of entitlement. It has withheld stolen spoils and makes up excuses to keep them. But wait till you hear the second excuse. The museum refuses to agree that most of its keep is stolen. The argument is stealing is not really stealing if you're taking something that's lying around. Finders keepers. Such interesting logic. Do they also eat other people's lunch left unguarded in the office fridge? Their defense holds no water. The crimes committed by British colonizers are undeniable. They stole from the whole world, and now a large part of that cultural heritage lies unprotected in their museum. It's unacceptable. For decades, England has gotten away with it and raked in tourism revenue. The museum's trustees are comfortable and in no mood to return what's not theirs. But what about their government? Experts say most disputed artifacts will have to be returned if the government really chooses to. The US, Germany, Belgium, France, they're all doing it. They're returning the loot. But England remains bullheaded. Britain cannot right historical wrongs, but it must stop profiting from them and not make excuses for theft. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story, starting with space. Do you know how astronauts eat in zero gravity? An Emirati astronaut has released a video. His unusual way of spreading honey on a piece of bread is a must-watch. We will show you how he does it. Meanwhile, do you feel nervous on flights? What is it that makes you nervous? Turbulence? Well, passengers on Southwest Airlines experienced something far worse. They saw the plane's engine catching fire. The flight en route Cancun in Mexico had to make an emergency landing. And a 4-meter whale was found dead on the Peruvian coast. We'll show you drone footage of it. And finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1994, the French troops pulled out of the East African nation of Rwanda. This came after ethnic tension reached its peak. Thousands of Tutsis and many Hutus were murdered. But on August 21st, France's highly controversial mission in Rwanda came to an end. We're leaving you with that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.